that we are learning how to get back to loving one another as neighbors. Lord, we thank you for removing hatred. Lord God, we thank you that you're getting us back to leaning more toward understanding the truth. Lord God, we're no longer limited in understanding that we're all created equally. Lord, we thank you that the history is revealing once again that we all have rights to be called men and women of God. Lord, we thank you that we are no longer limited to being miseducated about what the blacks have did in this United States. We're no longer limited to understanding and believing that Africa is a place of those that are uninvolved in society. Lord, we are once again reminded of the history of the Egyptians that once controlled this whole world. And so now, right now, we're learning to treat one another the way we want to be treated. We're learning to love one another the way we want to be loved. And now, acknowledging Juneteenth, Lord, you're helping us once again to understand that we can be free and still not understand our rights. We can be free and still be destroyed because of a lack of knowledge. Lord, we thank you that we have a mayor in place right now in this community that understands that if we could get our thinking right, as long as we control our thinking, we can control our own actions. So now, Lord, we thank you for informing us to let us know that we can make a difference. We can come against violence. We can stand for justice. And so as we march today, let us march with a hope that we are going to continue to be better. The best really is yet to come. Lord, we thank you for rising up leaders like Sister Karen that's bold and unafraid. We come against the spirit of fear right now. We will not allow hate to survive. We will not allow those who come to destroy us to survive. We will change those that hate us to love us. And we give you all the glory right now for canceling all the plans of the devil, taking the hate out of the hearts of the haters and replacing it with love. And we thank you and we praise you. And everybody agree with that prayer, said amen. Amen. Okay, we ready to go. We're going to follow.
All right, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is a special broadcast of The Conduit. This would typically be a hoodie rant. I got other things to do today, so it's not going to be a hoodie rant. I got on my suit jacket. We're going to let a couple people come in before I get started. If you look at the link, City Council is tonight. This is in response to the study session for City Council last week, where there were some very disturbing comments made in regards to REACT, the reformation of REACT, what's going to happen, how it should happen, thoughts on all that good stuff, So I appreciate everyone coming on in and joining wherever you may be watching from, but we've got to get into it. Tonight at 5:30 is City Council, and that will be taking place at the Norm Dix building. If you can show up, public comment usually happens pretty immediately, so you want to be there at 5:30. If you are unable to make it, you can provide public comment via Zoom. And let me go ahead and see if I can't find that link here for you. And you can also make your voice heard that way. But it needs to be heard. Now, there's a saying that is usually in the signature of my emails. Power is taken, it is not given. Power is taken, it is not given. If you are waiting on folks to give you something, you're going to be waiting a long time. It has to be taken, y'all. It has to be taken. All right, I see a few more people coming on in. It is Wednesday, April 19th. It's 11:56 a.m. in Kitsap County. So glad that you are here with me. I'm going to go ahead and get this link here for you guys so that you can come to City Council tonight and give public comment. One, let me go ahead and put the link in the description here. Go ahead and put that in the chat for you. All right, so you can take that link there, and that will link you to the City Council main page where you will see the Zoom link there. Okay. All right. So in the description also is the 1 hour snippet of the study session from City Council. So that was almost a 4-hour session. What I did was I just cut that down just for that conversation about React so that you can be informed, so that you know what was said. Okay. And as you see in the title, Oppression Olympics. Now, our councilwoman, Denise Frey, alluded to this directly and said that, she doesn't like the Oppression Olympics. Now, she decided to say this after she lamented on all of the oppression that women have gone through. Now, while she didn't say white women expressly, she told of her own stories of oppression. She told of the suffragette movement. But she left out quite a few very important pieces if you're going to be advocating for women and women's rights. One of the things that we see from folks that are racist, and I'm not calling Denise Frey racist, but one of the things that we see, especially during Black Lives Matter, is the co-opting of terminology, of phrases, right? Critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, blue lives matter. We're intellectually honest people here. One of the other things that you will see people that are biased, prejudiced, racist, discriminatory, whatever thing that you want to call that, is they will weaponize your heroes. They will take the quotes that fit their narrative, and that's what they'll give you. What would Martin Luther King do? Can't we all just get along? Councilwoman Frey decided to cherry pick a quote from Frederick Douglass that fit her narrative and use that as her justification. We see this trick bag all the time, especially in politics, and we have to call it out when we see it. Must be called out. I know that we're busy and we're in survival mode. We're trying to get through the day. We're trying to take care of ourselves and our families. Many of us don't want to invest the time to go through the garbage and the crap, to go down and make public comment, get involved in the democratic process, because many of us are disenfranchised and we feel like there is no democratic process, that it's just a trick bag. It doesn't matter. Republicans, Democrats, it's just the other side of the same racist coin. So we don't, or we can't. It's not designed for us to participate in this democracy. And that's part of the game. It's part of the game. But let's get into some history. Because one of the things that she left out, and what a lot of people leave out, especially when we're looking at the current wave of white feminism that we're in today. See, the trick bag is, hey, queen, women power, equality. But what we don't talk about, the massive overlooked role of female slave owners. See, the patriarchy is bad. White men are the enemy. And so what white women have successfully done is two things. One, they've sidestepped their role and their responsibility in slavery and Jim Crow. Two, they said, hey, BIPOC women, black women, why don't you come along? Your men are oppressing you too. And we're going to fight for rights for all us women. And unfortunately, we're going to get into it. That's what happened. And we know that historically, during the civil rights era, white women got the lion's share of the benefits during that time. Now, we are in the era of cancel culture, and only certain narratives can be pushed forward. So these conversations aren't going to happen, right? Well, you say, okay, well, fine. And we're going to get into some of these articles here. Yes, white women were slave owners. We'll get into that. We'll get into some of that documented history because they're not teaching you this in school, right? And right now, nationwide, they're trying to remove actual American history out of the classroom. So much so, we have folks saying, hey, you know what? Slavery wasn't really that bad. Some slaves were happy. Segregation, constant gardeners, how white women kept Jim Crow alive. So when people say, well, I didn't own slaves, why should I have to pay reparations? It went far beyond just slavery. See, Jim Crow went up through the 60s, and most people would say it even went further than that. And we'll get into that also. Oh, yeah, we will. Again, we don't talk about this. What classroom does this get spoken about, taught accurately? Now we just want to move on and move forward. But our Jewish brothers and sisters will never forget, and nor shall you. And it is up to us to ensure that they don't forget. As they say, you better put respect on our name. Here's some examples of what Jim Crow laws look like. But first, let me go here. This is the these are the black codes here. Actually, let me go here. Or maybe we should start with slavery. There was something else I wanted to show you. It's very frustrating. So again, the title of this show, The Oppression Olympics, as Denise Frey and many others like to throw out there as a way of, hey, you know what? We all have problems. All categories have gone through their things. Indigenous folks, white people, Hispanics, Asian folks, women, LGBT. So we don't need to have an Olympics. We don't need to, measure, well, who was more oppressed, right? See, when people say that, that means they don't want to be accountable for the part that they've played. So understand that. So if you don't know how to read between the lines, we're going to teach you here today. What's really being said. And again, it's something to take time, however long she pontificated on the oppression that she herself and other women have suffered, and then to cap it off and say, well, this isn't the oppression Olympics. I don't like the oppression Olympics. Okay. There's a reason why these things aren't taught, why these conversations aren't had, why these folks aren't going to advocate for you. They're advocating for them. Here we go. So the suffragette movement, which is what Councilwoman Frey was talking about. Not all women gained the vote in 1920. For many women, in the 19th Amendment was only the beginning of a much longer fight. And I'm just going to read this. When the 19th Amendment became law on August 26, 1920, 26 million adult female Americans were nominally eligible to vote. But full electoral equality was still decades away for many women of color who counted among that number. The federal suffrage amendment prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex, but it did not address the kinds of discrimination that many American women faced. Women from marginalized communities were excluded on the basis of gender and race. Native American, Asian Americans, Latinx, African American suffragists had to fight their own enfranchisement long after the 19th Amendment was ratified. Only over successive years did each one of these groups gain access to the ballot. Now check this out. Look how they did the Native Americans. In 1920, Native Americans weren't allowed to be United States citizens. So the federal amendment did not give them the right to vote. The first generation of white suffragists had studied Native communities to learn from a model of government that included women as equal democratic actors. But as suffragists, they didn't advocate for indigenous women. Nonetheless, there were Native American activists, and I don't want to butcher her name, continue to organize and advocate with white mainstream suffragists. With the passage of the Snyder Act in 1924, American-born Native women gained citizenship, but until as late as 1962, individual states still prevented them from voting. So understand what feminism is in the mouths and in the minds of certain people, because this is left out. Let's see what happened to the native-born Asian Americans. They already had U.S. citizenship in 1920, but first-generation Asian Americans did not. Asian American immigrant women were therefore excluded from voting until Immigration and Nationality Act until 1952 allowed them to gain citizenship more than 3 decades after the 19th Amendment. So the white suffragettes, see, they were concerned with their rights. This wasn't feminism for all women. Latinx women contributed to the success of the suffragette movement at both the state and federal levels, particularly with their efforts to reach out to their Spanish-speaking women. And in Puerto Rico, suffragists like Luisa Capetillo worked to attain women's voting rights, which were first given to literate women in 1929, all Puerto Rican women in 1935. Yet literacy tests remained an effective means of keeping some Hispanic and other women of color from voting long after the federal amendment was passed. It took a 1975 extension, I was already born by then, Voting Rights Act, prohibiting discrimination against language minority citizens to expand voting access to women who rely heavily on language other than English. So where were the white suffragists? 1920 to 1975, 55 years? They got what they wanted. I would tell you, city council kind of looks the same, right? The entire council is white. And it's made up of both white men and women. A portion identify as LGBTQ plus I plus. 2 are feminist, for sure, self-proclaimed. The one BIPOC person ran off. Some African American suffragists in the North were able, with the 19th Amendment, to realize the rewards of their activism. But throughout much of the country, the same voter suppression tactics that kept black men from the polls. Oh, remember, this is oppression from men, right? Black men weren't the oppressors. But that's neither here nor there for this conversation. From the polls kept black women from voting too. Literacy tests, poll taxes, voter ID requirements. Does any of this stuff sound familiar today? Intimidation and threats and acts of violence were all obstacles. Folks walking up, they've got their guns and they're across the street. They're asking you, what right do you have to be here to vote? Wanting people to have ID to vote. That sound like today? And the people that are advocating for that, are they all white men? No, they're not. The struggle for suffrage, which began for black women in the early 1800s, continued until activists such as Fannie Lou Hamer and Diane Nash won the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. 200 years later. 65. White women got it in 1920, 45 years. After the 19th Amendment, the work to secure the vote for all women has continued. Beyond 1920, diverse women expanded voting access to more Americans in their project of creating a more equitable society through voting rights that persist today. So understand, when you watch the city council meeting and they're heated because they're arguing against calling it race equity, when you listen to them speak and deliberate on how REACT should be formed and what powers it should have, understand, not really advocating for your voice, right? They're arguing against it. When they can all have a hell of a chuckle at the end, as if our issues were a joke or a punchline. Tremendously offensive. And the thing is, they do it out in the open. They don't even have to hide it because it's open for you to come and sit. It's the reason why I broadcast city council meetings, so you can see what's being said. You can see how people think. You can see how they make their decisions. You can see, are they actually allies? Or do they just show up to your events like allies and then dismantle all the stuff that you're trying to do when it comes time to do it? If you are for us, how are you against us when you're advocating, when you're talking about the issue? Why is Councilwoman Chamberlain the only voice in that room who appears to be speaking from an advocacy standpoint? That doesn't sound like allyship to me. You can tell when people don't have your best interest at heart, when they are not living in the solution. How do we fix this? Not why, well, no, we can't do it that way. No, it shouldn't be done this way. No, we shouldn't have people out of the city of Bremerton be able to serve on REACT. When we know that the Marvin Williams Center, Emmanuel, is the central hub of the entire county. What it is an opportunity to water down a group of people that are fighting for equity, for clarity, for transparency, for inclusion, for justice. And they will die on every hill. They will make every point a fight. Matter of fact, I'm thinking back. I cover city council every week, right? For the last, 4, 5, 6 months or so. I'm trying to think of the last item that city council has been at odds with each other. And I honestly can't think of one. Why is it this? Why is it this? I have a book that you should check out here. The History Alumna explores the role of white women in American slavery. This is an article written by Nora Longo in 2020. The author is Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, and she's an associate professor in the Department of History at the University of California, Berkeley. And she's a specialist in African American history. I'm trying to enlarge this here. Asked her a question. Where did you get the idea for your book? Why do you feel this story needed to be told? What was the most startling, unexpected thing you found in your research? Now, let me go back to the top and I'll tell you. The name of her book, The Way They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and put that in the chat. So, BIPOC women, if you haven't read this book, this is one that I encourage you to pick up and take a look at. Many of you probably haven't heard of this book. You don't know the history, you don't know the stories. And now they don't want to exist, right? Because we just need to get past it. We've got bigger things to worry about. We've got homelessness, we've got food insecurity, we have health issues, we have war. It's too late. You know, one of the reasons why people say, well, we can't pay reparations, right? Well, who would get them? How would they spend the money the right way? I didn't have any slaves. It was so long ago. Well, one of the reasons why it was so long ago, every other group has gotten some form of reparations. This country gives reparations to other folks in other countries that we weren't even in the middle of the conflict with. But when you kick it down the road, from administration to administration to administration to administration for generations, not for years, not for decades, for generations, then it gets so far down the road, you say, hey, we can't pay for reparations. That was 200 years ago. Yeah, slavery was 400 years ago, ended 200 years ago. Then we had 200 years of Jim Crow, right? Y'all weren't paying reparations during Jim Crow. Well, I didn't have any slaves. I immigrated here. I'm second, third generation, yada, yada, yada. But you're here thriving on the country, off the backs, the blood, the rape, the torture of black men, women, and children. So, yeah, you owe. But what was the thing that was the most startling or unexpected thing that you found in your research? Another reason why so many historians have dismissed or diminished the importance of slave ownership for white women is that they have assumed that women, especially married women, couldn't own slaves because of legal constraints upon women's rights to own property in their own right. Rather than proceeding from this assumption, I reflected how many enslaved and former enslaved people who claim to have female owners, particularly married ones, and I sought to legitimate the remembrance by seeking out evidence to support their claims in a variety of places where wouldn't typically think we would find women. Census records, financial records, Civil War era military correspondence, legal materials which documented the purchase of sale of enslaved people, even the letters and account books of slave traders. Y'all with me? Are y'all with me? When I started this project, most folks told me I would find few, if any, white slave owning women in these documents. Thus far, I found thousands of them. Let's look at another article here. Let's look at this one. The massive overlooked role of female slave owners. Estimated that 40% of slave owners may have been white women. That's damn near half. But what they've done is they have excused themselves out and put it on white men. Right? Because they were oppressed by their man. We don't even talk about this, right? We talk about slave master, slave massa as being male, patriarch. 40%, almost half. Most Americans know, right? How was this country founded? Me enlarge this on this side here. Most Americans know that George Washington owned enslaved people at his Mount Vernon home, but fewer probably know that it was his wife, Martha, who dramatically increased the enslaved population there. When they wed in 1759, George may have owned around 18 people, black people. Martha, one of the richest women in Virginia, owned 84, 4 times the amount of slaves that the president owned, the first president of these here United States of America. The high number of people Martha Washington owned is unusual, but the fact that she owned them is not. Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, who wrote the book that we were talking about, has compiled data on just how many white women owned slaves in the U.S. And in the parts of 1850 to 1860 census data she studies so far, just so far, white women made up about 40% of all slave owners. She only looked at a decade. Where is this history? Where is this knowledge? Why are we not talking about this? Reconciliation means truth, transparency, And through reconciliation, there must be justice. Slaveholding parents typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than land. In her book, They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South, came out in February 2019. What this means is that their very identities as white Southern women are tied to the actual or possible ownership of other people. White women were active and violent participants in the slave market. They bought, sold, managed, and sought the return of enslaved people, in whom they had vested economic interest. Owning a large number of enslaved people made a woman a better marriage prospect. Damn. Once married, white women fought in courts to preserve their legal ownership over enslaved blacks, as opposed to their husband's ownership, and often won. Our courts are set up like that now. For them, slavery was their freedom. So, oppression Olympics? Okay, let's play your oppression Olympics. You wouldn't dare disrespect the Jewish community. By trying to inauthenticate our experience or their experience. They Were Her Property upends a lot of old scholarship, right? Because the victors, the winners, they write the history. For example, previous scholars have argued that most Southern white women didn't buy, sell, or inflict violence on enslaved people because this was considered improper for them. But Jones argues that white women were actually trained to participate from a very young age. Here's an illustration here that's in the Library of Congress, right? Their exposure to the slave market is not something that begins in adulthood. It begins in their homes, when they're little girls, sometimes infants, when they're given enslaved people as gifts, she says, citing interviews with formerly enslaved people that the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal agency, conducted in the 30s, right? When slaves were still alive. Could have paid reparations back then. Could have atoned back then. We're still hiding now. We're really hiding it now, right? Jones Rogers showed that part of the white children's training in plantation management involved beating enslaved people. How demonic is that? We're going to teach our kids. Hey, Deborah, I'm live. You're live. Watch what you say. So it didn't matter whether the children was large or small. One woman told the WPA, they always beat you till the blood ran. So slave masters, both white men and white women, trained their white children to beat us until blood ran down. They were trained as children to beat us. As adults, white women often tore black women away from their babies so they could nurse mistress baby instead. To this end, white women placed thousands of advertisements in newspapers looking for enslaved wet nurses to feed their own children and create a huge market of enslaved black women who had recently given birth. Why did these white women want black women to nurse their children? One complained she felt like continuously having children and continuously nursing her children made her a slave to her own children. That is an actual quote. Some black women reported the WPA interviews that their mothers would always give birth around the same time as the white mistress, suggesting that these mistresses were also orchestrating the sexual assault of enslaved women. There were instances which formerly enslaved people did in fact say that their mistresses either sanctioned acts of sexual violence against them that were perpetrated at the hands of white men, or that they orchestrated instances of sexual violence between two enslaved people that they owned in hopes of producing children from those acts of sexual violence, Jones Rogers says. White women also fought to maintain the wealth of free labor that slavery provided them through the Civil War. As Union troops made their way through the South, freeing enslaved people, white women would move enslaved people further from the soldiers' path. One woman, Martha Gibbs, even took enslaved people to Texas and forced them to work for her at gunpoint until 1866, a year after slavery's formal abolition. But you have white folks, and unfortunately some black folks, telling you, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. Some slaves liked it. After the Civil War, Southern white women sought to recreate slavery through exploitive work contracts. This is the start of Jim Crow. Some also wrote books portraying the institution of slavery as gentle and benign, exactly what I was saying. The most famous being Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell, a woman born 35 years after abolition. Yet, as Jones Rogers argues in her book, it was not only white women's ideological and sentimental connections to slavery that made them defend it. Scarlett O'Hara would have been protecting her economic interest also. Ladies and gentlemen, react is necessary. React is important. You must demand. You must make your voice heard. You cannot allow these things to stand. It's 2023. Most people aren't going to just out and out call you the N-word. You must understand how people move. You must understand how political games are played. They say racism takes both sides of an argument. They argue for and against. Whether it's far-right Republicans that are staunch in their open discrimination, overt, or it's the liberal left, who through programs tell us that they're helping us, that they're for us, while they still mommy us and tell us they know what's best for us. $5:30 p.m. tonight, City Council, Marvin Williams Center, Norm Dix Building. The link is in the chat if you cannot make it. This is American history. This must be preserved. This must be talked about. Do not allow them to forget. What are the numbers? 6 million Jewish people. They will never forget. And black folks can never forget either. 12 million slaves. And the atrocities that happened to the Jewish community was not the doing by the United States of America. Slavery and Jim Crow was. I'm Marwan Cameron. I'm Marwan Kayeen Akil Cameron. This is The Conduit. I have